All right, it is May 13th, 2024. I've got a actually fairly full agenda today. And just a reminder, this is Gateway API community meeting. It's a Kubernetes community meeting, so just please be nice to each other, follow Kubernetes code of conduct. And if you would be so kind, if you could write your name down in the attendee list, we're having a little bit of a continued contest between the earlier time and, well, I don't know what's earlier and what's later, but at least for me, 8 a.m. is earlier, even though it's a day later, um, on May 7 versus this time slot, which seems to have gotten to the point where it's more lightly attended. So yeah, that's a fun change. Um, but with that said, just keeping track of who can make it to different times is always helpful. Um, On meeting time slot, I think these are all just my thoughts. People can suggest changes to them. We talked about switching to a more frequent Europe-friendly meeting time. I think that probably still makes sense, but given the schedule this month, it probably wouldn't make sense for this month. So my proposal is to just meet next week at this time slot, skip the following week, which would be Memorial Day for those in the US, and then pick back up with the alternating time slot between Europe friendly and APAC friendly time slots. Does that sound fair? Anyone want to meet more or less? Okay, cool. I can help make that a reality, but just gonna rely on some lazy consensus here. And of course, if anybody wants to have an informal meeting on May 27th, by all means, I know many of us do not live in the US, so by all means, uh, happy if you want to meet. Um, cool. All right, the next one, I don't know if Mike or Sneha are here today, uh, but I think you're next. See Mike.
All right. Hey. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of draw attention to an issue that I am planning to spend some time on and kind of a call for any other implementers that are interested in helping out with this. This is something that we've attempted to solve in the past and then it ended up getting backed out as part of just cutting scope to make sure that the existing infrastructure stands made it into a release. Um, but yeah, so this is important to one of Azure's Gateway API implementations for getting to conformance, and we want to make sure that we're approaching this from a way that is actually going to help other implementations as well. So we, like many others, have the concept of a like static infrastructure mode where the infrastructure is provisioned out of band rather than in response to creating a gateway uh, custom resource. So yeah, there's a handful of other implementations here, and please reach out and let me know if you're interested in working on a proposal for this.
Can you just explain how your static mode works as much as you're
Yep.
able to
Yep,
for
absolutely.
Azure?
Yeah, so you for our implementation, this is for Azure and AKS's application gateway for containers. You would basically deploy out of band an existing Azure load balancer. And then when you're deploying the gateway resources, you need some way to connect the gateway resources to the physical infrastructure that exists. Our implementation is currently using annotation for this because when the 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 ALB is created, there's two ways an Azure Load Balancer can be created. One is in a managed mode, in which case it'll be reflected with a custom resource created in your cluster, like a Azure Load Balancer type custom resource. And in that case, you can reference it by its name and namespace in annotations on our gateway object. And the other case, if your Azure Load Balancer is provisioned either manually or in a different or is managed by a different cluster. We have an annotation that references it by resource ID. So I'm yeah, I guess I'm a little anxious about the idea of completely opening up annotations on conformance
Yeah.
just because that's potentially like a really large loophole that could let you do things like have an ingress implementation that somehow conforms to Gateway API by mashing 12 annotations onto it. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm a little anxious about trying to approach it from our current implementation, but that is a possible path. I've seen other implementations that similarly have a requirement for an annotation either on Gateway or Gateway class, and I tried to post a comment like summarizing my understanding of all the implementations that have spoken up in this issue and yeah, link to docs in many cases. So yeah, that's how we do it currently. I guess I've also looked at the part of the infrastructure stanza that got backed out was John Howard had proposed an attached to proposal stanza, which would basically similarly to how our annotation works currently, would allow you to reference an in-cluster resource by a group kind name.
Now, wait, is that so you have a managed load balancer or something like that's provisioned out of cluster. Is there any kind of in-cluster resource that references that? Like I think I've seen your
Yeah.
annotations and they're just kind of like references to a cloud resource, but not
So
necessarily a
there's two different
Kubernetes.
styles. Yeah,
Okay.
there's two different approaches. So if the ALB is provisioned in a managed way, we do that through a controller in a Kubernetes cluster. And when that happens, a custom resource will be created. So there is like a representation of that external infrastructure in the cluster. Um, if that happens in a different cluster, like say in a multi-cluster model or something, and you want to reference it, then that's where we're doing the like resource ID thing. Um, I have some ideas for how to like maybe manually create a custom resource to link to that resource ID. Um, but yeah, that's how it's functioning today. Nick, question?
Yeah, so I think when we talked about attached to before, the idea was that I mean, I think you're correct in what you say that it's not really dependent on the merging to some extent, but it's basically the same thing effectively. It's, the idea here is that something, whether it be a human or a controller, provisions a gateway that describes the already pre-created infrastructure, that then implementations can understand, oh, this gateway attaches to this other gateway, and that other gateway is what you should use as the source for like addresses and things like that.
So in our implementation currently, and I believe also in the Nginx implementation, you can only attach one gateway to an external infrastructure representation.
Right.
So our two implementations, Austin and Nginx, do not currently support merging. We do want to support merging eventually. So that's on the roadmap, but right now it's just limited to one.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I mean, but conceptually, at a
Yes.
spec level, it is
Yes.
the same thing, right? Like it's, it's the idea is that you are taking one gateway that describes the addresses and the sort of the outside view of the gateway, and then you are merging the listeners into that gateway. Like that's what you're doing. Like, so whether or not you are only allowed to have one set of listeners or you merge multiple sets is then kind of another layer on top.
Yeah. Gotcha. Candace, question?
So I wonder if this is, I think it is because of the conversation that that Nick and you had just had, but is this the same as the area that we were discussing where you could have you could have a separate mesh gateway API installation and another sort of gateway API installation that was strictly for connecting directly to non-mesh.
No,
Not the same.
no. So this is all within the context of a single implementation. It's a Azure managed north-south gateway.
But I mean, just to open it up to some other use cases besides Azure. I'm wondering whether this has anything in common with the idea of, say, using an unmanaged. So say you had both a managed mode and an unmanaged mode gateway controller on your cluster. And we wanted to make these two things work together so that maybe the managed one was working for mesh ingress and the unmanaged one was working for direct connection to services, but not through mesh.
I mean, right now, if both of those are, if the mesh one that you're talking about is an interface between north south and mesh, that's totally possible. Why? That's what controller name and gateway classes are for. The idea, where you've got two implementations running in a cluster, and there's two gateway classes that correspond to them, and the gateway classes have gateways, and the gateways have other stuff, and all of that stuff rolls up to the separate implementations, and they're free to do whatever they like with the sort of desired configuration. Is that what you mean, or are you talking about having it so that there's some way to have one implementation be the mesh and one implementation be the north-south bit, and have them work together?
We actually have a real use case for that at OpenShift, at Red Hat OpenShift, and we have a mesh product that we want to use. That's one of the implementations of Gateway API, but we also want to be able to use this and not connect any mesh. We want to be able to use Gateway API ingress without any mesh on the other side. But we want to have, we want our customers to be able to use either one or both. And I'm trying to see if this is the kind of, whether it would work with this idea in terms of, we actually do use the words managed and unmanaged. So I was like, wow, is this what we're talking about?
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, I think this is pretty different. I think what you're asking about is already possible today. Like as an example, Linkerd does not have like a north-south implementation. You can deploy Envoy Gateway as an ingress north-south implementation and either integrate it into the mesh as like the front door through which like public traffic reaches the mesh, or you could have it standalone and just connecting to services that are directly and not have it part of the mesh. Like that is possible today, like Nick was saying, because you can have like each gateway can reference a different gateway class, and the gateway class can reference two different controllers. So you could have like two different controllers operating in the same cluster, managing two different implementations of Gateway API today. That's not related to this. This is more of like basically like the way that many implementations today respond to a user creating a gateway resource is they will dynamically provision infrastructure. They'll spin up a Envoy or other proxy on a pod within the cluster. A few cloud implementations, so ours and GKE, have like hardware load balancers live outside of the cluster. So what we need to do with our implementation is link that existing hardware to the configuration that we're defining within the cluster. And that's
Okay.
what this is trying to solve.
So this is kind of more like what Dave Fertisowski was proposing at one time, isn't it?
Yeah, that's so yeah,
Okay.
it's that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
definitely.
It's quite similar conceptually to the idea of gateway merging, because the idea is that you describe the static config, or static in terms of Kubernetes, in that there's no controller that will actuate creation of infrastructure based on that gateway being created. And then you have another gateway that says, I attach to this other gateway, or I'm merged into this other gateway. And the other gateway describes all of the physical infrastructure. And all I'm doing here is describing like a set of listeners, essentially. And so like it's a way to split those two pieces of config apart. So that you have the option of sort of dynamically or in an out of band way creating infrastructure, and then having a way to describe that infrastructure in the cluster.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. This is a great conversation. Maybe I'll follow up with you offline because I do want to make time for the other items, but I want to understand a little bit more about the difference in how AKS handles things in GKE, because GKE dynamically provisions cloud resources in response to Gateway,
Yep.
which sounds a little bit different than what you're doing. So I just
Do not do that.
okay, all right. Yeah. So okay, this is
The thing that
a
we
really
can
good
do dynamically is reserving a static IP address. Like if you, yeah, that's one thing we can do dynamically. So that's a little bit different.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for resurrecting that discussion with a really great overview. I'll try and take a closer look, and would be great to see if you or others have time to push this forward. Cool.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm hoping it'll be complementary to the gateway merging work, and I think landing those in the same release will be a pretty compelling, complete story. So,
Yep.
thanks.
Yep. Makes sense. Cool. All right. Next up is 1.2. Lots of discussion about 1.2. First up, this is a reminder, there's a release cycle PR. I don't mean for this to be a mandate, but so far, the only feedback I've gotten is that it looks fine. So that's great, but just please, oh, there's a rebase that did not work as I intended, whatever. I'll fix that at some point. But the main deal is release cycle. It would basically define a few different phases, and we would start basically now in a scoping phase. And that scoping phase would have a firm deadline after which the scope of 1.2 can do nothing but decrease. So we can say we're going to try to fit all these things in, but if something needs to get cut, it will get cut, but nothing else will be added after that point. And then from there, we'll work on iterating on the gap or gaps that make it into scoping. Then finally refining those. We've approved the gaps, they're all good, or they've missed the cut and are removed from the release. Then we refine that with documentation and API spec. Then we enter review, and then we're like final SIG network review, and then we release. But the key thing is each of these have timelines. Before we start any of these phases, we set a firm date for the end of that phase. And then if you miss the cut, it's on to the next release. This is a rough working proposal right now, but in lieu of anything else or feedback, this is what I'm going to be working with, or what I think we'll be working with. So feedback very welcome, but otherwise going with lazy consensus on this one and saying this is the path forward.
Yeah, Rob,
So-
how long do you want to leave this for the lazy consensus period?
Yeah,
days?
I think, yeah, good question. So what I've said is I think we as maintainers should aim to have final dates for the conclusion of a scoping phase next week. So let's aim for lazy consensus on, say, Wednesday, Thursday of this week. If we don't hear anything, we're just gonna merge. Let's say Wednesday, Thursday in Australia. That'll be
Yep.
somewhere in between. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine by me. I
So
just wanted to be clear for everybody. So if you
Yeah.
have any opinions about this, you need to contribute them sometime in the next 48 hours or forever hold your peace. Or until we get around to changing it, probably.
right. This is meant to be an experiment for 1.2. I hope this is a step in the right direction. I know it's been really frustrating to have ambiguity in terms of a release process and timeline. And the goal here is to have a very clear idea of what's going to be in scope for release and when the release is actually going to happen. So hopefully this gets us closer on both fronts. Cool. So let me just write that down in the notes just for kicks. Lazy consensus by Wednesday. Pacific time. Sure. Okay, next up is I just, because we're just kicking off the scoping for 1.2, there's a million things that we could talk about. And I just want to mention, I spent some time looking through the project board, which hopefully is useful. I spent some time making some updates as well. And there are some unfortunate things that we missed as we were moving things around. And some things like documentation did not get covered for like session persistence. Yeah, I may miss it. I may have missed it, but I didn't see any session persistence docs. And I feel like I just missed it somewhere. And the same for client cert verification, etc. So these are some cleanup items that could really benefit from some help just as we're looking at this project board. So I guess I'll create issues for them. I think they're really good ways to contribute. One of the things that has been very painfully obvious is that we could use all the help we can get if you or your organization is able to help contribute to Gateway API more. That will help make these release processes more predictable, more timely, and the overall quality and documentation go up, because I know we all have fairly small roadmap, fairly small availability right now. So anything everyone can do to help will be really appreciated. Yeah. Okay, so with that, I spent some time running through the board of what are things that are in experimental right now that could theoretically move beyond experimental, move ideally to standard channel. The first one that popped out to me is HTTP route timeouts and the corresponding duration gap. This one has remained unchanged. Anyone on this call already implement this gap, perchance?
Cilium has.
Cool. I feel like this is fairly broadly implemented now, but I don't have a good
Dave says in the chat Istio and Contour as well.
Yeah, I'll say
Okay.
Istio and I believe Linkerd has it implemented halfway.
So, and Opera Gateway as well.
Okay, so
You know how maybe we could check is if we checked the feature list on the
that's a great, yeah, actually I think, yeah, all those implementations I think that you listed have conformance reports now. So yeah, you're completely right. Okay, cool. So that seems like an easy one. So gateway class supported features. I don't know how many people have implemented this. I think if we start making this the default path forward for reading from conformance, that will help. Default does not necessarily need to mean exclusive, but I think it would be a good little bit of encouragement. I think gateway class supported features is also fairly stable. I don't know if there's any other changes we want to make here, but this probably
I think-
deserves.
I think it does need a bit of talking because we need to decide if we're going to leave it as one big flat list or break it down
Yeah.
further. I think there is a risk with one big flat list that it might end up too big.
Yeah, that's probably.
I had a wrench to throw into this one. I don't know if you saw my comment, Rob.
No.
So our implementation, I believe GK's as well, doesn't have a gateway class in the cluster. I was wondering if you thought at all about how we might choose to approach something like this.
What? So does so you just don't have a gateway class resource at all,
Yes.
or? Oh, okay. Yeah, so the way GK works is we install, so we don't support custom gateway classes.
Okay.
We install gateway classes that we support, and they exist as an informational thing. That's what I could say. There's no meaningful modification someone can make, but it's just for the sake of discovery. And I think that's one of the primary goals of gateway class in general, that you can pop into any cluster, say kubectl get gateway class. Oh, here's what I could have to choose from. So hopefully that approach is not too painful. I don't know. I don't know if there are.
I'll double check what our
Okay.
implementation looks like and if something like that's an option. Yeah, I believe we just refer to it by name because we don't have any utility for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll double check on that.
Yeah, I mean inside GK the names are meaningful, right? The names, it's not like we're doing a cross ref with does this gateway class exist, and does it the gateway class is published because it is informational in nature, but not. Yeah.
Yeah, we absolutely intended that as a use for gateway class, is for it to be created by the implementation, to sort of tell people which, how to roll up our gateways. So yes, it is,
Yeah.
as Arco mentions in the chat, like that's why currently the spec mandates a gateway classes, so that the entire config is represented in the cluster for the user.
Yep.
That's not necessarily for the implementation. A lot of the time, the gateway class has very little meaning for the implementation aside from being a bucket to hold the gateways, but it's as much for the user as it is for the implementation.
Sounds good. I'll loop back to our folks on that one then.
Cool. So back in TLS policy is a fun one because although everything got renamed, sorry people, not everything, but a lot of things got renamed in 1.1, it has logically remained the same. Like none of the behavioral things have changed in the 1.1 release that I would say. So you could make a case that it could theoretically meet criteria for graduating in 1.2, but it's going to be a bit more challenging because I think right now we only have two implement. I think Contour and Envoy Gateway have implemented this, maybe others, but they've only implemented Alpha 2 is my understanding right now. So we would need everyone to implement and release support for Alpha 3 and hit target timeline for this to actually graduate. Oh, Alpha Gateway ahead of the curve. Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So the user,
And
as per usual, we need 3 implementations supporting V1 Alpha 3 plus conformance tests to ensure that and for us to be confident we're covering all of the functionality.
yeah. So no conformance tests. I think Candace, you had mentioned you were starting to work on conformance tests for this one.
Yes. I haven't gotten
Okay.
very far so far.
Okay. So this is a maybe, but if we're going to push for this one, we need to, the conformance tests seem like the biggest gap, but we'd also need to get at least one more implementation on board. Cool. Then the next one, in-cluster gateway deployments. This is a series of related gaps that I mostly will rely on John, if John's on the call, to say the status of, but I know we got some bits of in-cluster gateway deployments into 1.0. If I remember correctly. I forget. I think that's just the annotations and labels. Does that sound
Yeah, that
accurate?
sounds right. I think there's some PRs to
Okay.
add more stuff, but that's all that's actually.
Okay. And does Istio, anyone actually support that right now?
We support it.
Right.
I think I saw Cilium supports it.
Yes, we support infrastructure annotations. Yep.
Okay. Okay. 3 out of 3 implementations. So it's Cilium, Envoy Gateway, and Istio, obviously. Okay.
So
Cool.
that is going to be a little tricky to write a conformance test for, in that we'll need to,
Yeah.
we'll need to sort of say, we'll test if you create a load balancer service or something like that and check that those, but it's going to have to, those performance tests are going to have to make a lot of assumptions.
Dave, didn't you try and write a conformance test for this? And the conformance test was basically just you don't prevent these fields from being set or something like that. I forget. Or am I confusing that? Maybe he stepped away. Okay. But yeah, conformance tests are going to be very tricky. All right. But yeah, like you said, Nick, I guess, I mean, I hate to have any conformance tests rely on the presence of a service type LB or service of any nature. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for this conformance test, like it might be that we need to do like annotations and labels on load balancer service or something like that, and make the conformance test be very specific. And that way it's extended, and it'll stay extended forever, because not everyone may want to support that particular mode.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the only way that I can see to do this. And then you can add different versions of the extended test if you want to check and see that some other type of resource gets the correct labels and annotations. I mean, yeah, it's always going to be very dependent on exactly how your implementation works.
So it's like you need like some kind of configurable generated resources, like whatever, for a conformance test that this could check. This needs
like
this
I
needs
don't
more
think
discussion.
you can make a generic one, because you're going to need an arbitrary type. You're going to need a bunch of generic stuff, and that will be complicated. Without starting to use, go into deep into some API machinery shenanigans, like using unstructured or something like that, and duck typing into.
I mean,
unstructured,
if all you're looking at is object metadata, is not that painful-ish, but it's still painful.
Then you need a way to say what sort of thing you're looking for to tell the conformance test. I think it's really complicated, and almost certainly, like above 90% of the people of the implementations that use this are going to use it to create a load balancer service and maybe some pods or something. Right. And so like, it's probably better to just be like, hey, most people who use this are going to do that. If you want to say that you support implementation, like labels and annotations on infrastructure, and you want to pass a conformance test, then here's the extended feature you enable. Aside from that, like that's really all we can do for conformance. That's probably one that we need to have a larger conformance discussion about, is, for this sort of feature where it's not really testable in a generic way, like do we have a feature that has no associated tests, or do we have where you can just say, yeah, sure, we'll pass these down for you, so that in the gateway class you can see that your implementation will respect the infrastructure standard, and then do we have another one that's like, this is the tested version? We haven't done that before, because usually our rules are it must be tested and testable.
Yep.
But yeah, we will need to have a further conformance discussion about that, I think.
This is also going to come up, and not to get too far ahead of myself, but some of these future gaps, like the external authorization one, for example, like unless you have a very tightly bound format and everything, then this is really hard to conformance test as well. Yeah, okay. Who wants to, John, you started owning this one. Do you have enough time to continue, like to figure out what conformance looks like here? Do you need to defer to someone else?
It would probably be best if someone else could pick it up. I'm not sure I'll be able to have time in this timeline.
Any volunteers? Okay, well, we can drop something like in on the GitHub issue just to note that this needs an owner to drive it forward. But yeah, anyone who would benefit from this, if you can jump in and help get it the rest of the way across, especially I think conformance is really the only gap we have left on this one.
Hey Rob, can you attach a link to the issue so in case myself or someone else looks through these notes can jump in there and
Yeah,
assign themselves?
I promised they exist and they're in this somewhere. Let me do that after this meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
But yeah.
It's also a little bit complicated because it was originally one gap that we split up into multiple gaps. And so it's sort of it involves reading back through the gap history and some PRs and stuff like that to trace exactly what happened. It was a suboptimal situation for many reasons. And we've tried not to do. That's one of the reasons that we ask people to focus on smaller, more implementable gaps as a starting point these days, because of this sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're running low on time, so we should keep moving.
Cool. The last one that I think is a candidate, again, anyone welcome to add more to this list. As policy attachment, there was a discussion at KubeCon, and then as a follow-up to KubeCon that basically resulted in these action items. And we've done a subset of these already. I think the first two, and we have not done the last two items.
Yeah, I mean, I think even the first two, there's still a bunch of work to sort of tidy up everything and make sure the status makes sense and to talk about the design and a bunch of other stuff. So we've made some spec changes, but there's more work to do to finish all four of those.
Yeah. But this one in particular feels like we know what we want to do. We just need to actually do it. And there's a lot of tidying up and there's a lot of complexity beneath the surface on this one, but at least we know the direction we want to go on this one. Nick, you've historically owned this gap. Do you have capacity to keep owning this gap?
I'd certainly like to be involved. I don't need to be the one driving it though. I know we've got a few people who are interested in having this move forward. So I'm happy to drive it. But I think I'd definitely like to be involved in sort of at least in the sign-off phase. But I am happy to have someone else be the one driving it. It'll probably happen faster if it's someone who has more bandwidth to dedicate to it. If I'm just reviewing rather than doing all the doc writing, then it'll happen faster. But if folks want me to be the one who owns it, I can. I just think it's more likely to make 1.2 if someone else is doing it.
Makes sense. Cool. And just one other reminder here, if you have something like that you really do want to push in the lower list, each one of these that are graduating basically creates a slot for a new thing. So if you want a new thing and there's not enough slots, then that's another reason to try and push an old thing through, basically, because you're creating a slot for whatever new thing it is that you want. Yeah. Okay, so this is for sure not an exhaustive list, but I just started in a few minutes before this meeting to come up with some ideas that might fit in the scope of this release for new to experimental. Oh, I forgot the most obvious one. Route rule names. There's a get for this somewhere that is like approved and just not, I don't know. This one is the lowest hanging fruit, definitely making the list one. Then there's we have, if you think of front-end MTLS and back-end MTLS, we basically have 3 of the 4 pieces, and the piece that we're missing right now in the API is the certificate that goes from a gateway to a backend. So 3 in this diagram. It'd be really great to have a GEP that does this piece of it. I'm hopeful that could be relatively straightforward. There is going to be some discussion about where exactly that lives. This specific gap left room for it to exist on a gateway or on like at a backend layer. We have not made a decision here. This was just, it could live in either place and we should make a decision. Yeah. Thank you to whoever's adding links to here. This is very helpful.
That's amazing.
Next up, cool. Next up is cores. This is just like a table stakes feature. Everyone supports it. I think Arco, you created this, a year ago now. I mean, this seems like something like we should cover. I don't know if anyone has the time to push this forward. I don't know, Arco, if you have any in it.
There's already somebody who's said they'll work on this actually, right? So if you go down.
Oh,
yeah. So
cool.
we have.
Okay. All right. Cool.
So yeah, so I think we can put this one in scope for sure, assuming that the other ones are moving out. And so I think in terms of scoping, the cause can fit in.
Cool. Okay. Easy. Then the next one, external authorization. This is one that I just linked specifically to Flynn's comment, which I think is the latest update post KubeCon. I actually missed this discussion at KubeCon, but it feels like this got a fair amount of attention, so we should at least talk about it in this release cycle. I know Flynn's not at this specific meeting because it's late for him, but yeah, I know this will be an area of discussion for 1.2. If we can get a narrow enough scope, maybe we can even fit it in. Are there anyone on this call interested in pushing this one forward as well?
Again, I'm happy to review this one, and I'd like to be involved in the discussion, but I am not going to have bandwidth to push it.
Yeah.
I'm similarly interested in this. Would like to help with review, but my plate's probably going to be too full.
Makes sense. Okay. Cool. Okay, I just trying to follow up in chat too. It looks like Arco linked to regex based rewrites. Yeah,
It's pretty popular based on the thumbs ups on it. So
yeah, you're right. Oh, even me. What do you know? Let me.
I'd love to see it, but I think I put a comment in there that I think there are a lot of things that we need to make sure we get right, or else it's going to be almost impossible to implement.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is the entire area of API that we don't have any conformance testing for right now is regex. So this would be another thing if we really wanted to. It would be like you could have a conformance flag or something like that says my implementation supports this flavor of regex, and then we have conformance tests that expect that, or we have conformance tests that work across.
I think this is going to need to
flavors.
be we pick the lowest common denominator regex and say that's the one. That's the one we conformance test. Otherwise, it's going to be too hard and too complicated to maintain the conformance test for everything. Personally, that's my view.
I think definitely
PCRE maybe, or like one of the more compatible regexes, and we say, okay, that's the one. All regexes are this type. End of story. Because the more we add, making it so that making it so that the regexes can work in a different way depending on what the implementation is, like that's a disaster for portability because it's silent portability, right? Like, yeah, so like I think that it's very important that we pick a lowest common denominator regex and say, if you support regex, you support this one. That's the end of the story, because otherwise it's not portable.
I think some proxies are going to be too locked into the implementation of regex that they support, but I am with you on the lowest common denominator thing, because I think there are some regex, somewhat generic regexes that would be valid across different formats.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And
yeah.
maybe if we use, yeah.
We say,
but-
you know, we only support this subset of, you know, or I think, yeah.
Or that's all we're going to
PCRE is
test. We're
pretty
going to
close.
test
Yeah.
the regexes we use in our conformance tests are valid in these 3 formats, or I don't
Yeah,
know,
exactly, yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And again,
Okay.
the conformance tests are not going to be exhaustive in terms of regex, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
going to be some subset of the possible things that you can do with regexes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I see we've added,
All right.
some folks have added more stuff.
No, this is great. This is very, very helpful. So retries. Yeah, this is a big one. I had left this open of what on earth are we missing for mesh? Retries does seem like a big one. Also seems relatively popular and long-lived. Just yeah, looks like oh yeah, I remember Flynn does Linkerd does something different here, which is the retry budget, which I don't think is broadly supported right now, but it's very cool.
Envoy
s-
does have an implementation of it.
Oh, interesting.
And there's actually
Okay.
been like 3 attempts at adding that Envoy's implementation to SDO. So I signed myself up for this. And as part of it, I am going to try to get SDO to implement the Envoy budgeted retries as a second implementation, so that we can figure out some way to scope that as extended and do the normal counting one as well.
Okay. Do we know of anyone like Nginx, HA proxy, other underlying implementations that have anything like this? Anyone from Kong and I don't know. Shane, not to pick on you. But yeah.
Yeah.
We can come back to this one. But
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think the Mike, the sort of the provisional memorandum gap that yeah, I think in this case it's probably makes sense to have to do a gap 1731 as a provisional gap that just fills out the background thing, like I did with timeouts, that sort of explains here's what everybody does. You know, here's the things that everybody supports in terms of retries. It talks about retry budgets as a concept and whether or not we're going to support it. You know, and all that sort of stuff, and just lays out the background for the feature. That is the place to start here, because I think once we have done that effort, and this is what we found with timeouts, you know, when it's a weird thing that maybe implementations do differently, no one really knows. What it needs is for someone to sit down and look at what implementations actually do and what you can do with implementations and write that down. And then it becomes much easier to have a conversation.
Yep, agreed. That's what I'm hoping to do as the first step there.
cool. Awesome. Thank you for taking that one on, Mike. Yeah, this will be great. And then the other one, rate limiting, I agree. This is another important detail that
It's a very old issue.
oh, it's closed. Sweet.
It
Must have been got by Stillbot.
Years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think we all know that eventually someone wants to do this. This is
Yeah.
another one that has exactly the same problem. You know, I'm okay with someone reopening this and saying I'm going to do the sort of the roundup of what different data path implementations support. And like the reason it's closed is because it's like, well, no one's willing to work on it, so we're not going to just leave it sitting open here. If someone wants to work on it, then you can work on it, but the place to start is, again, you know, a roundup of all of the implementations, what they do. This one needs to be a lot more discursive. It can't just be a table saying, supports rate limiting, right? Because everybody who supports rate limiting supports it in different ways, and it's global rate limiting or non-global rate limiting, you know, like, or local to a particular data path implementation. That's Envoy makes that distinction. You know, so that this one needs to be a bit of an essay about like what types of rate limiting there are, how they work, you know, how you configure them in each data path. And that is the place to start for anybody who wants to see that feature really happen. You know, you need to go and do the research and write it all down. You know, that's one of the reasons why it's not done yet, is that no one has gone and done the research. And so if you really want to see that feature, you got to do the research. Someone has to do the research before we can have a productive conversation about it.
Yeah, that
We can
very
reopen
well
that issue
said.
anytime. As soon as someone says they're interested in doing the research, I will proceed over to that issue and reopen it immediately. But until we have someone willing to sit down and do the research, it's probably not that much work. It's probably like a few days to a week's worth of reading and understanding. But like, that means someone needs to dedicate that time, and no one has had the time to dedicate. And so for everybody in the community watching this, if you really want rate limiting, that's what we need someone to do. You don't need to know anything about Gateway API to do this work. You just need to be able to go and read the docs for all the different data paths that are in use. If you are interested in doing this, ping me and I will open the issue and help you get started. But yeah, none of us have the bandwidth to actually do the research.
So yeah, I agree. One quick thing, I know we're running out of time today. I just want to say that our best case here looks like maybe we'll get 5 things out of experimental in this release. Realistically, we're gonna miss on at least one of these, so we might get 4. That would mean 4 slots, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things that we want to fit in. So at least twice as many things that we would love to get to that then we have slots for. So that will be fun. What we've said in the past, and just as a reminder, the things that really help, you know, push gaps to the top as far as criteria for moving to experimental would be widespread buy-in from implementations. So proof that, you know, if this gets into experimental, we'll have several implementations on board to implement it. Then, you know, widespread interest from the community. And then also kind of that widespread portability, that kind of first bit of scoping that Nick was talking about of, we've written this out and we've shown that, hey, there's this set of features that is portable or potentially portable across implementations. And so if we have strong answers to all of those, then I think that makes for a very compelling case for your gap to make it to the top of the list. But yeah, that's what we're going to be working on in the next month or thereabouts. And really appreciate everyone who can help work to make a good case for the features that should make the cut in Gateway 1.2. Oh yeah, there's another one too, the cookie match one. So yes, we'll have to be spending some time running through these and trying to prioritize. But what I would say is the strongest way to make a case for the gaps that you're interested in are really just showing that, hey, I as an implementation would support this if it came in, and then two, that it's broadly supportable and broadly interested in the community. So yeah, hope that helps. Any last comments before? Yeah, Candace, go ahead.
Just a quick shout out for TLS route. I tried to bring it up last meeting and it kind of got, we ran out of time. But TLS route, I think, only needs conformance tests too. We have plenty of.
For the pass-through mode, yeah. I think there's an unanswered question about how we would do terminated mode. People do want to be able to do SNI-based routing with terminated mode that I think needs clarity. But yes, I agree. It just needs conformance tests for the pass-through mode. That can be added later. Sorry, is a better way to say that. Sorry, Candace.
And as far as moving it out of experimental, considering it to be moved out of experimental this round.
Well, yeah, it would need, it's the same thing. It'll go into, I think that we can put it into the pool of moving out of experimental, but then we only have those 5 slots that Rob mentioned. TLS route is experimental, is it?
Yeah, so oh yeah, so this actually needs to run up here.
Yep. So that might be a sixth
yep.
slot. If we,
Yeah, all the better. Good call.
Thanks, Candace.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. And certainly if you or anyone you know is interested in driving that forward, these are I think the ones that I am personally most invested in are just trying to stabilize the API we have. And of course, there are some really important things here, but I just want to make sure that we're not overloading experimental. So as long as we can keep this this pipeline moving, then hopefully experimental channel stays healthy as well. Cool. All right, in the 1 minute remaining, we are basically out of time. I'll just mention that for release channels and versioning, there's been a remarkably long thread on GitHub, which has been great. Thank you to everyone who's taken part in that. I sent out, one of these find the time that works for you things. I need to respond to this myself. But for others, please take some time if you're interested in having a focused meeting just on this topic. I would love to chat about it because I would like to find some better ways to do things in 1.2 and start this conversation early. And then there's a few things for triage. If you can look at them on your own time, that would be great. And then we'll see everyone next week at this time, and we can try and figure out how we can prioritize these, any additional data, any additional exploratory work on these gaps, or even just implementations saying these are the ones that I'm most interested in and would support, would really help make a good case for which ones make the cut or don't. Yeah, with that, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day. See you.